there's a distinction between those two. I've given you a couple of dissertation titles. So we have here comparing the experience of virtual SC and traditional classroom environments. Now you could do that as a qualitative study. And what that might mean is you would sit down with educators, teachers who teach in a traditional classroom and teach in the virtual SC classroom. You sit down and talk with them, interview them about their experiences and their practices. You could do that just as easily by talking to, for example, high school students or in virtual SC or in traditional classrooms. And again, the same kind of thing, you interview them, you have a conversation with them about their experience. In which case you would be answering that question using the qualitative approach. But you could just as easily look at that topic using a quantitative approach. So you could do a survey and look at grades, for example, of high school students who are doing virtual SC versus a traditional classroom. And do a survey about their experience, how much time they spend online, for example, as opposed to interacting with the teacher in the classroom. Those are sort of survey, those are quantitative kind of questions. We're looking at the grades of individuals in virtual SC or traditional classroom, or even assessing their knowledge of particular concepts. In all those cases, you have the same dissertation topic, but you have a different type of data that you're collecting to address that topic. I don't see that. There's different types of data. And similarly, exploring the use of community or school gardens in South Carolina elementary schools. You could do the same type of thing. You could address that qualitatively. Identify some teachers who, in elementary schools, who have community gardens or who work with their students on community/school gardens. And again, sit down, interview them, converse with them. Okay, that's qualitative research. As opposed to surveying, sending surveys out to all elementary schools in South Carolina who have school gardens, whoever's in charge of school garden, they would have them fill out a survey about that particular topic. Again, quantitative, both of them look at the same topics, but slightly different. Okay, so let me just check before I go any further. Does anybody have any comments or questions on that basic distinction between qualitative and quantitative? Okay, then within that structure, qualitative versus quantitative data, what I wanted to do was talk about sort of 4 standard methodologies, some are quantitative and some are qualitative. I just talked a little bit about each of those methodologies. The first couple of experimental methods and survey methods are both quantitative approaches. Unobtrusive measures actually has sort of 2 general categories. One is quantitative, one is qualitative. And last one, grounded theory, is qualitative. So we're sort of covering the gamut of different types of methodologies. And so let's go ahead and start right with experimental methods. Most of you are familiar with the basic structure of an experiment. Science and such, you have 2 groups. You may have them randomized, pre-test. If you do some type of manipulation for one group, not the other, and then you have a post-test where you measure the effect of the manipulation. So experiments are very much about controlling everything except for one thing you want to manipulate. And that manipulation allows you to compare 2 or more groups or the performance of 2 or more groups on a particular topic. This is a standard experiment that we do in structural science. The experiment approach is probably the more common type of quantitative approach, a very effective tool if you want to do some type of comparison. So, for example, I use the example of in language arts, you're all familiar with, you probably have encountered whole words versus phonics that they call how to teach reading. If you encounter that debate, you will recognize that the one way of doing quantitative research experiment methodology to look at the ways of teaching readings, strategies, whole word versus phonics, whatever that might be applied. Any other type of technique where you want to compare this versus that, experimental methodology is sort of a pretty standard type of methodology. I use the example of comparison of single gender and mixed gender classroom experiences at perceptions of physical education. So it's possible to imagine, for example, that there are a couple of classrooms. One is female only, one is mixed gender. And then to be able to look at the experiences of those females in the single gender classroom and in the mixed gender classroom, what's their experience with physical education, how they feel about running around the track, for example, or what's the perceptions of it. Do those perceptions differ for females in a female-only classroom versus females in a mixed gender classroom? In both cases, you have some element of comparison in standard experiment. Let me just check. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that particular type of technology? The next methodology that I wanted to talk about was survey methods. And I'm pretty sure that every one of us at one time or another has participated in some type of survey. So in one sense, we're already familiar with that approach, that type of methodology. And typically what happens in surveys is people get not necessarily long, 20, 60 questions, generally speaking, 20 questions fits on about 1 page. And so, 1 to 3 page survey, which gives a little bit of data. If you're doing a 20 question survey on a particular topic, that gives you a little information. 20 questions, for example, the first one would be, if you're looking at the experiences of crime. Have you ever been a victim of a theft or a robbery? Well, those are 2 questions right there, yes or no. Are you satisfied with the operation of your local police force combating crime? That could be a strongly dissatisfied, dissatisfied, satisfied, strongly satisfied, a 4-point scale. That's one question. You ask 20 of those types of questions, that gives you a page survey. Now that gives you a little information. So typically what's needed for surveys is a fairly large or much larger sample size than you might be able to experiment. So you might give a survey of 20 questions to 100 or 200 participants. And that would give you a pretty solid amount of data for a study. Doing a 5-question survey with 10 participants is pretty small. It's definitely not enough for a doctoral dissertation. So if you're doing a survey doesn't need to be a long page or 2, but you want to give it to 100 individuals. And so I provided some examples of dissertation topics that relate to that. I already mentioned comparing the experience of virtual SC and traditional classroom environments. You can survey individuals, students, teachers, for example. A couple other examples: the prevalence and type of suicide prevention programs in South Carolina high schools. You can imagine mailing, contacting all South Carolina high schools and asking the head counselor to fill out a 1-page survey. What tools do you use to deal with or prevent suicide in your school? A relatively short survey, so they're more likely to fill it out. Get a large number of individuals or a large number of schools. Similarly with computer programming courses in South Carolina middle schools, the same type of thing, contacting middle schools and getting the survey to the person who teaches computer science and programming and finding out about their student interests, how many courses they teach, what their enrollments are, all the types of things that might allow you to think about how much exposure your students have or the students have to computer programming or computer science business. And the last one, exploring the use of community schools or gardens in South Carolina elementary schools. Again, same type of thing. You just contact I have no idea how many schools are actually in South Carolina, about all 400 or 500, and identify which ones have community gardens, and have the person in charge of community gardens fill a survey about how many students they have, how much time they spend on it, what do they use the garden for to teach their students, et cetera, et cetera. And in all those cases, each person is providing you a little bit of information, so large number of individuals to provide a little bit of information, gives pretty solid data set doing your analysis. Any comments or questions about survey research?
I always thought the surveys were always a method that we go out because we're going out, surveying, talking with people, giving them this type of survey to gather the feedback. So it can be both quantitative and quantitative. Maybe I'm answering it wrong, but I've always thought that it was. That's what I was using.
Okay.
Interview, and I didn't know things like that, but as part of the interview, I would do a survey, give to them, give feedback on this.
And I would actually call that mixed methods, because quantitative surveys are very much quantitative. You're asking them, not just asking their opinion or anything like that, but saying age or income or whatever. And then the other side of things, the interview, that is very much qualitative. Although that's not called survey, that's a different type of methodology. We're actually into that. And does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Where do you get an idea of what sample size is big enough or too small, that kind of thing?
There are a couple of ways of doing that. Number one, when you're doing your literature review, as you're reading the literature, especially if you can find articles that use the methodology you would like to use, pay attention to what their sample sizes are. And those sort of form the sort of the standard that particular field. Experimental, for example, it's not uncommon to see 30 to 60 to 90 people, usually less than 100 observed in a experiment. It's not uncommon to see a couple hundred, 200, 300, 400 or more in a survey. In contrast, when we get further to the end around the theory, you might only expect 20. And it just depends on the type of methodology. The other way of doing it is, you can actually do this in R. There are a set of statistical procedures called power analysis that actually allow you to calculate, if I'm looking for something, how big of a sample size will be. Sort of like Arvi's analogy. If you're looking at an acorn versus a microbe, you need different sizes of microscopes. And there are statistical tools that allow you to look at the statistical power of the microbe in a study, which helps determine sample size as well. So there's this common practice in the field, and then there are actually statistical techniques. Which way you use depends very heavily on what your dissertation is doing. Any other questions or comments about experimental survey or any related issues? Okay, so the third general category of research methodologies are what are called unobtrusive methods or unobtrusive measures. And that's measures where you collect data from individuals without ever interacting with them. You may interact with them, get permission, but generally speaking, you're collecting data without interacting with them, sometimes even without their knowledge. Okay. In fact, when I teach this topic with my undergraduate students, I sometimes call that this is fine. It's all sense. And generally speaking, there's sort of two main types of unobtrusive measures tools. The first one that I'll mention here, number one, is what are called intentional traces. And what intentional traces do is they take records, already existing records that were designed for one purpose, and they use them for a different purpose. So, as an example, I've tried a couple of examples here. Report cards. You have to give report cards to all your students. Schools get report cards. We give report cards. Some sets are grades to students. which are used to track a student performance. You can use them for other purposes, however. You can look at, for example, the performance of students, in second, something that's going on, I said on the website, look at the performance of students based upon whether they are first people who go to college and go to college university, as opposed to students who have parents or siblings who have gone to college. So the first time college attender, socioeconomic status and stuff. In that case, you have grades, but they're not specifically looking at grades. You're looking at the effects of this or that on grades. So they're being used for another purpose to keep track of students. We do the same thing when we analyze the performance of a particular major, for example. We look at the grades of biology major versus the grades of English major. And that sort of gives us an assessment of type of the quality of the program, the rigor of the program. So again, we're using those records as either one thing or something else. Similarly with medical records. Okay. We all have medical records. You go to the doctor, keeps track of keeps track of your medical records for diagnostic purposes, for assessment, for treatment, etc. But you can use those medical records for other purposes as well. You can use them. In fact, hospitals, this is exactly what they do. They will take medical records and, with permission from the hospital IRB, they will actually go into people's records to look at, here's a particular disorder. Which of these treatments is most effective at treating that disorder? Cancer, for example. Which treatment, this A or B, has a higher mortality? Or if you're treating heart disease, which of these medical techniques is more effective at detecting a particular type of heart disease than others? Again, they're using the same records, same medical record, but they're using them for a different purpose in which they were originally intended. That's intentional traces, and I'll provide a couple of examples of that. We have a methodology or a study on geography of South Carolina school report cards. Well, you're all familiar with school report cards. Just be aware that they're designed for a particular purpose. They can be utilized or applied to other situations as well. It might be possible to take a school report card for every school in South Carolina and map out by school district or by county how schools are doing that report card, by instruction report card across the state on a county or even by district basis. That's using those same records to, in a slightly different purpose than for which they were being intended. That's a legitimate type of dissertation problem. Similarly, mapping South Carolina's critical needs in education. You're all aware of sometimes school districts, sometimes schools put out information saying that they have special need for people in this area. You can do the same thing. You can collect that from all the different school districts and such, and do a comparison of different school districts in different areas of the state, versus the coastal plains, in terms of the particular type of school needs of that are needed. I'm not sure how to say that. In terms of their natural particular needs. And that would be a reasonable topic as well. Again, taking information, advertisements, job advertising, or their type of needs of particular school districts, applying them for a different purpose, doing analysis of the performance or some other characteristics of schools or districts. Incidental or intentional traces. Anybody have any question or comment about that? By the way, these two studies are both, they're sort of geographically based. If you have school or district information, report cards, or other sorts of things, it makes a lot of sense to be able to present that information geographically. So you have geography mapping, all of that information. will note that intentional traces is the last quantitative approach. The last two we're going to look at are both qualitative. And so I'm going to move to the next unobtrusive measures, and that's called content analysis. And essentially what content analysis does, or is it's a systematic description and analysis of any sort of recorded information. So whether we talk about newspaper, YouTube videos, TV shows, internet, social networking sites, Facebook, Pinterest, tweets or blogs, all that information is recorded. Whether it's videos, audios, podcasts, whether it's already written down if your Facebook chats, all those types of things, that's all recorded information. And any of that information is perfectly legitimate data for collecting and analyzing to look at a particular research topic. So I use the example here of social media perceptions of armed teachers in schools. Well, where's a controversial topic? But it would not be hard to imagine if you're on Facebook or something to identify places on Facebook where those conversations are being held, or conversations, if we don't really want to get into something a little equally controversial, social media perceptions of sex education in schools. In either case, there are long-standing and sometimes heated conversations about those topics. Social media sites, newspapers, news shows on television, they report issues like school shootings and such, they report in certain ways. That's all recorded data. It's legitimate to use that information to say, well, how does the issue of armed teachers in schools, how is that being addressed in popular social media? Or how do news organizations, newspapers, TV present the issue of school shootings? How do they talk about it? That's content analysis. And very much qualitative because you're taking language and analyzing how people or what people say about it.
Okay, so perceptions, that can be measured on a scale of 1 to 5, agree, disagree, and I realize it's still qualitative. So does it become quantitative as soon as you take that and say, okay, so I see that 50% of people believe that armed teachers, or 50% disagree that, teachers should be armed. Does it change all of a sudden the quantitative?
That is starting to take the original language and starting to give it I would call it a
like when we analyze it, and I see, wow, there's a lot of people that hate that there are armed teachers. So I see that of my 600 friends on Facebook, 60% of them don't want teachers to be armed.
Okay.
Does that now become quantitative data?
If you push your analysis in that direction, that could become quantitative. When you start talking about the way that they're talking about it, the language, the strength of the language that they use, the reasons that they give, their concerns or emotions about that particular topic, that's very much qualitative. Now you can start turning it around and say, well, this many people are angry, this many people are fearful, and this reason is the most common reason. That's sort of quantitative. It's a little more quantitative. Qualitative. So it's possible to do that, but it's also possible just to analyze this conversation.
I just don't know how you show qualitative data without a number. Or is that a whole other class? A whole other session.
That actually, I'll say, write down that question and give it next residential when we're talking about qualitative data. When I probably won't be giving the secret out the
Okay.
Just, I don't know. That's sort of it. Any other questions about content analysis? Okay, if not, that leaves us with the last research methodology. And that's grounded theory. An entirely qualitative approach. And this is essentially where you sit down with individuals and you have a conversation with them one-on-one for an hour or two about their experience. So it's a conversation, it's each with the individuals. And that information, that's your data. You can imagine sitting down to talk with a teacher who teaches them the virtual SC, asking them some general questions, having a conversation. That hour interview might easily be 20 to 30 or even 40 pages of transcripts. That's a pretty reasonable amount of information. Now you do that with 10 teachers, and you just got 200 to 400 pages of transcripts. That's a pretty solid set of data on the student analysis. And I give 2 examples there. Number one, comparing the experience of virtual SC in traditional classroom environments. Again, you can be high school students, you can be teachers, and that conversation or that set of conversations, that's your data. Similarly, with a critical theory of second language teachers, classroom pedagogy and expectations, can also be also very much a qualitative report, where you sit down with people who are second language instructors and you talk to them about what are your goals for your students? How do you go about accomplishing that? What do you find are the best parts of teaching the second language? What do you find are the worst parts of teaching the second language? And so that conversation with 10 or 15 or 20 teachers starts to give you a pretty good corpus, pretty good set of information to start looking at what commonalities there are, for example, in their interests for teaching the second language or their goals or their methods of teaching. In that regard, let me just note that especially for grounded theory, when I talk about in-depth hour or 2 interviews, I'm going to give you sort of a scale of interview. How many people here, first of all, have ever donated blood? If you donated blood, what happens when you get in there, they figure out the blood test, and the nurse basically walks through a set of questions. That's very much what's called a structured interview. They have a clear set of questions, and they get answers to the questions. That's a structured interview. The opposite of the scale is an unstructured interview, and that's the type of interview or conversation you have with your friends. We talk about anything, jump from topic to topic. There's no particular focus. That's unstructured. With grounded theory methods, you often have sort of in between what's called a semi-structured interview, where you're asking broad questions, and then you have a question, you have a discussion of those broad questions. So, what are your goals in teaching a second language? What do you want the students to know? Well, that's not a yes or no type question. It's a conversational type of question. It's not unfocused. It's sort of got that reasonable focus, a structure to it, but not so tightly structured as that interview you get with the nurse you're going to what. So a semi-structured interview is a common tool for doing on grounded theory. I'll note that when you do grounded theory, you end up with the same type of thing as content analysis. You have this recorded information, transcribe it, and then you have your sets of data such that you may enter into a package and that will allow you to do analysis of that. So we have experimental methods, survey methods, unobtrusive, intentional traces, and content analysis in grounded theory. Sort of the 4 most commonly described, I don't know if that's 4 or 5, commonly described research methodologies. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of them? So then you have a few set of ideas, additional set of ideas, and now you have the potential for thinking about it. whatever your topic, how are you going to approach that topic? What type of data do you want to collect? How are you going to collecting that data? Survey, theory. And I think on that note, let's wait a few questions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess I will see you tomorrow.